Welcome to the Irish Farmers Journal Weekly Podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.
Hello, Patrick Donoghue here, news editor with the Irish Farmers Journal, and I'm joined by our news correspondent Pat O'Toole to discuss the appointment of IFA's new Director General, Damian McDonald. Pat, you're welcome.
Thank you.
Almost a year to the day since Pat Smith left the IFA. IFA finally has a new Director General in place. Who is Damian McDonald and what can you tell us about him?
Well, he's well versed in the ways of both IFA and the Farm Centre. His first job was in Mockra as their Ag Affairs Policy Director. He then went into IFA. After a couple of years working in IFA, he was back in Mockra as the CEO. He's had experience leading a farm organisation. From that he went over to Horsesport Ireland, and I think this will have informed him very well because Horsesport Ireland is an amalgam of so many different competing interests. It's very political. You need to know who everyone is and where they're coming from, what their agenda is, and to be a conciliator. Damian fulfilled that role really well over the last decade, and I think that makes him an ideal candidate. At 44, age profile is very good. He's stepping into an association that's, I think, crying out for leadership, that will want him to succeed, and I think he'll have the support and backing of everybody.
Just when you say that he's stepping into an association that's crying out for leadership, what does he have to do? He doesn't start till January, but what's the first 100 days that he needs to get done?
Tone, I think the tone he'll set in terms of just that calm influence to ensure that IFA turns the page over. As you say, we're a year around now since Pat Smith resigned, and in that time IFA has been looking forward, and IFA has been carrying out a review, a systemic review, which is quite comprehensive, and it took a lot of time. It explains the time lag between Pat Smith's departure and Damian's appointment, I think, but also doing the day-to-day work, both the voluntary officers and the staff. But within that, there's been a lot of looking back, and I think that's over now. IFA will stop looking back and will start to look forward as to how it can best represent farmers in a new era, because we are, I suppose, in a hiatus between the last CAP negotiations, which were so fraught, but we're into the beginning of the discussion around what the CAP will look like in the next decade, and IFA needs to be in there on the ground, because the previous CAP reform process started from such a distant point of what Irish farmers would like. There was a huge work load for 4 years to row it back to something semi-acceptable. That needs to be, I suppose, task number one.
A couple of the perhaps more obvious points that Damian McDonald will have to deal with: the Pat Smith court case between IFA and Pat Smith, a dramatic fall off in both either membership and or levies. Is Damian McDonald the right man to save IFA if they need saving? And secondly, how does he go about doing it?
Well, if it can be done, I think he's as well equipped as anyone could be to do it. I think it's restoring that sense of confidence among the membership that they will sell the organisation to their fellow farmers. It's ensuring that there's a good selling of the governance that has been put in place through the reforms. Teddy Cashman at today's Executive Council gave a very comprehensive overview, 7 key recommendations covering all the areas where there was a lacking, and I think that's important because that seals off those fissures that existed. I think that after that, then it's about delivery. Farmers are very practical people. Farmers often have a bad year and they have to move on, and next year has to be better. What farmers will want to know about in 2017 from Damian McDonald from the get-go is, what are we going to do about beef price? What are we going to do about milk price? What are we going to do about
incomes in general? Is that
absolutely? It's always about incomes. Yeah.
So, what type of style? Because President of IFA Joe Healy and Damian have worked together. What's the type of relationship, the dynamic that a President and Director General, formerly General Secretary, what's the type of dynamic that the two of them have to have?
I think it's going to change, because I think it has to change. The previous dynamic had broken down, because the previous dynamic was one of where the President was the public face of IFA and was everywhere. And frankly, the Presidents were overworked, and it showed. if you look at any of the presidents in recent times, they age significantly because the workload has increased so much. I think there'll be more delegation from the president to the other senior officers in IFA, and I think that the president and the director general will be far more occupied with gathering the views of the association, ensuring that there's a constant dialogue up and down, and that the grassroots members feel involved in policy determination, and then delivering that policy through campaigns that are innovative and that will impact. Because the idea of standing at the gates of a factory as a first resort, that's gone. Those days are over. IFA have to impact on, I suppose, you have social media now, and you have so many campaigns which are in the court of public opinion, and it's there that IFA have to box smart.
You talk about difficult to get people out to protest at gates. Maybe it's not the way to do it. You talk about membership. Is there that appetite amongst ordinary farmers on the ground to get involved in a farmer organisation more, regardless of the size of IFA and the power that it has?
You've touched on a key pointer, because that's a significant issue. Younger farmers are far more likely to be involved in discussion groups. They're technically focused, and they believe that the best way of increasing their own personal income is through what they can do within their farm gate, rather than what they can achieve through collective representation. We talked recently about the 50th anniversary of the 1966 Rights Campaign, and I think that we have to hark back to that, in that there's a fundamental obligation on IFA to ensure that the typical family farm has a living income, and that's in doubt at the moment.
You mentioned earlier that the IFA, in their executive council meeting on Wednesday, that they set out why it took so long to make the appointment, almost 365 days. And secondly, what will the new man, what will Damian McDonald as Director General be paid by the IFA?
Yeah, significantly less than his predecessor. Damian's basic will be 185,000. The bonus culture is gone. He will have a car, and he will also have a 15% pension contribution. The IFA will make a contribution of 15% of his salary, about 27,000 to his pension. If we compare that to what Pat Smith received in 2013, basic of 295, pension of 150, bonus of 60, and director's fees of 30,000 from IFA Telecom.
Still a lot of money, Pat, to the ordinary sheep or suckler farmer on 12 or 16,000 euro a year.
Absolutely, but the reality is that the job is very significant, and it's in keeping with what people are getting in the likes of the dairy co-ops. Certainly someone on Damian's level will be receiving that or more, and I think that farmers deep down will understand that if you want to get really good delivery, you need really good people, and you have to pay for that.
And finally, why did it take so long?
I suppose, first of all, you needed to have a president in place. You had a very protracted election process, which didn't end until we were into the summer, and then Joe Healy, I suppose, had to get his feet under the table. It was very important that a president with a mandate was involved in the selection of the Director General, and there was an exhaustive trawl. KPMG were tasked with finding suitable candidates. Then we had 2 rounds of interviews. I suppose there is good sequencing in that the Lucy Report Implementation Committee have finalised their work as the new DG is announced, and we have a situation now where there's a small hiatus, but at the turn of the year, Damian will have served his notice period with Horseport Ireland, and he will move into the farm centre, and 2017 will see new beginnings.
Pat, it's fair to say that you have pretty exhaustive coverage and extensive coverage in this week's Irish Farmers Journal and on farmersjournal.ie. Pat, thank you.
You're very welcome.
The Irish Farmers Journal Weekly Podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.
Irish Water published the route of a new pipeline to bring water from the Shannon to Dublin, and many farmers along the way are worried about the impact of the project on their farms. One of them is Liam Minahan, who's a dairy farmer from Pucawn in County Tipperary. He spoke with Irish Farmers Journal news reporter Amy Fitzgibbon.
Basically, all I can tell is for 5 miles north of me and 5 miles south of me, there is a lot of farmers, and in my opinion, nobody wants the pipe. There are people who believe it's inevitable, but no one wants it. In other words, 90% of them understand that they're talking about the destruction of the quality of their land. Right? It is not going to come back the same, and no matter how well intentioned Irish Water or Bord Gáis are, they cannot do what they say they're going to do without destroying the land.
Okay, and you're a dairy farmer, Liam. What kind of an impact would it have on your land? You told me earlier it would slice right through right to the centre of your farm.
If you try to vandalise my farm, you'd come up with this plan. Right, basically what it is when I let my cows out in the morning, right, I'll be gone about 50 metres when I'm going to have to cross the pipe, which is another 50 metres. And it looks like at that stage when I then will have to cross the existing road that I always had to cross, to get to some more of my land, I'm going to have to cross the pipe again. Like, that makes milking cows unviable.
And it'll be impossible really to cross that pipe, because they'll be working on it for like at least a year and 8 and 6 months. That's how long they said that strip will be out of action, that 50-metre strip.
Well, we're at the rosy stage of construction like this, because we're talking to lovely guys from Irish Water, and they'll promise you the sun, moon and stars, but there's a vast amount of experience of farmers in the M7 region who will talk to anyone about what happens during the construction phase of these. If you try to cross your cows across this pipeline and a dump line trunk comes, they have the right of way. Your cows are going to end up inside in Limerick, because if that dumper driver or lorry driver stops to facilitate you, he will get sacked, right? So once this gets the go-ahead to start, farmer no longer has any say, right? So when they come through my farm, there's a couple of things I have to be worried about. If it comes through in wet weather, I'm banjaxed. If they send a bad digger driver, I'm banjaxed. If there's a deadline, I'm banjaxed, right? And at that stage, I have no input. The IFA have no input. They can talk all they like now. But if I hit any one of those 3 snags, and if I hit all 3, I won't be even able to grow grass anymore, right? My land is going to be destroyed, right? And if I meet one of those deadlines or problems, it's going to be fully destroyed. So, like, people are thinking about compensation. It's not on, like, you're getting compensated for loss of income. That's income you lose, right? You're getting compensated for capital. Like, I've heard people talking about the way there's no evidence that the value of land is affected by these compulsory purchase orders and way leaves. But there's absolutely no evidence to suggest that it's not.
And
in other words, there's no evidence.
Way leaves are the right of way that Irish Water will have to that permanent strip, right, basically forever.
Yeah. Now, the IFA told me that there's no evidence to suggest that it won't affect the value of my land. But there's no evidence that it will not. But there's no evidence to the contrary either. Like, there's just no evidence.
So you'll basically have to stop milking.
Basically, this is the finish of me milking.
And so in terms of compensation, you're saying there's really no compensation that can really compensate for the effect it'll have on the farm.
No, it's destroying the viability of my farm going forward. There is no way you can look at this any other way. If I had a short-term need for cash, you could say, okay, I could consider it. But viability going forward, like, whoever inherits the farm off me will inherit the farm as I give it to him. He probably won't inherit the compensation. So the next generation and from now on are always going to give out about that idiot who allowed the farm be destroyed. Yeah. And that is what's going to happen. Like, the money is not going to go with the land. So the next generation and the generation after that are going to look on me as the fool who let him through. Like.
And according to you, have Irish Water got better options, other options than putting this pipe through your land to pump water from the Shannon to Dublin to meet Dublin's water needs over the next few decades?
Have Irish Water other ways of doing it? Irish Water could have other ways of doing it, but they completely ruled them out, right? Now, they ruled out the use of bore wells based on a desk survey. In other words, they ruled them out without digging one bore. 30% of all the water in London comes from bore wells, right? Irish Water, for some reason or another, ruled that out. Now, it's hard to figure out why it was ruled out so early. Now, they talk about desalination because stories come out of London about the way London's not happy with desalination. So it was easy to rule out desalination. So it would appear that the decision was to have the pipe day one.
Yeah,
right? Because
desalination was the other option.
It was the biggest capital spend, right? And it gives Irish Water more relevance. The more money they have to spend, the more relevant they are.
Okay. And what about the threat of the CPO? What'll happen then?
Under the 2007 Water Act, for them to get a CPO, they have to produce to a judge evidence that this is necessary and reasonable. Now, I don't think they're going to be able to prove either. So I'd advise farmers not to be spending any compensation because I cannot see this happening.
Okay. And will you contribute to the public consultation that's starting now over the next 14 weeks?
I'm cynically looking forward to it. I'm up for it.
Looking forward to challenging them on all the issues, yeah.
I listen, I cannot understand the news that's in the radio today about Longford having the worst broadband. How can a TD in Longford talk to the people of Longford in the next general election saying that we're spending €1,000 million taking water to Dublin, a city that doesn't need it, and the figures prove it doesn't need it, while they're getting nets for the back of the goals and they've no broadband? Yeah. Like,
which is a far more urgent issue for the Midlands.
Cynical sponsorship of rural Ireland. Rural Ireland is being destroyed because all the infrastructure is going to Dublin. They're even piping water they don't need up. Right? Whereas we're meant to be happy with a car park in the soccer field, and it's just cynical. So how dumb can you be down in the country, like?
Yeah. I mean, Dublin will take the majority of this water, and Dublin is where the majority of the need is. So you think that the Midlands was just kind of shoved in there in order to give a kind of I suppose, justification for the pipe going all the way from the Shannon?
In 2007, there was an issue, right? And there was a shortage of water in the noughties when there was a crisis. But Irish Water figures at the time stated that what they had was a problem with treated water, not raw water. They never said they had a problem with raw water. So they needed a big new investment in treatment, right? So they came up with this grandiose idea because back then there was lots of money, right? Since then, they have invested 130 million in Leixlip and Ballymore Eustace. They increased the capacity of water treatment in Dublin by 167 million litres. These are their own figures. That's half of the capacity of this pipe, right? So that straight away rules out the need for this pipe. Half the need was ruled out by the increased capacity. So after spending the 130 million, they're going to decommission the two of them. Like they talk about the way 40% of the water of the River Liffey goes into Ballymore Eustace, right? If you were to use what they do in London about managing the aquifers and managing things like that, and the way they use intelligence rather than money to solve their problems, there's no need for this pipe. It just cannot be justified going forward.
Okay, so what's the next step for Fight the Pipe?
Listen, it's fight at every pass, right? And we'll give them no soft options. We'll fight for a judicial review. When it comes to compulsory purchase orders, we'll fight them at the compulsory purchase orders. They're going to need to keep drumming it in. And eventually they will trip themselves up. People will start to realise that you cannot spend 1,000 million euros pumping water to a city that doesn't need it.
You're listening to the Irish Farmers Journal podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.
Ornua's Chief Executive, Kevin Lane, gave the RDS Economics Lecture on Tuesday, and he shared a positive outlook for dairy markets. The Irish Farmers Journal's editor, Justin McCarthy, first asked him about the growing share of Irish dairy exports going through Ornua.
We've had fairly significant growth through the processors putting extra products through us, in particular cheese, butter and spreads. We've probably had more growth in those three categories than we have had anything else. And I think it's down to what we explained in the presentation. We've built new routes to market, we've built new infrastructure, we're driving our brands harder, and we're acquiring companies that do further processing.
You mentioned brands there, Kevin, and you gave the audience also an insight into the huge success of Kerrygold from your forecast from a €750 million brand to a €1 billion brand. How realistic is that, and where do you identify the key growth?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's not something that we have plucked out of the sky, because we feel very strongly that there is an opportunity in driving Kerrygold in three separate ways. Number one, geographical expansion. We go to 110 markets around the world, Justin, but a number of those markets we're a very, very small player, and we're confident we can build much more share. Number two, we're stretching the Kerrygold brand from being just a butter brand to being a dairy brand. We're now in cream liqueur, we're in yoghurt, and we're in other products for the future. And thirdly, we believe that there is more market share growth in markets like Germany, the UK, the USA, who have served us very well in the past, but certainly can give us more growth in the future. And we're very committed as a team. We didn't sign our names to a €1 billion brand without some serious scrutiny and research, and we're confident it can be achieved.
You mentioned in your presentation that Irish dairying will forecast to go to 7.5 billion litres. What percentage of that would you forecast that Ornua will be handling going forward?
Look, we haven't made any grand forecasts about us doing more or less. What we've said is we've got 60% of all exportable dairy is now coming through Ornua. That's the best estimate we have, and it's been vetted by all of the processors as well as the team within our own internal department. And we're happy if we can continue to maintain that share of a large growing base. If it grows beyond that, and indeed if you look at our growth in the last 3 years, you'd argue that we must be eating into a higher percentage. But we're not infatuated with what our percentage is. We just want to make sure that everything comes through us. We're A, adding value to it as best we can, and B, giving a really good return to our member shareholders.
And Kevin, finally, you gave some positive outlook on milk price. Maybe if you could just take our listeners through that. Yeah,
we've been noticing with great interest and experiencing that in the market that we have seen a fairly significant uptick in market returns for our core products over the past 4 to 5 months. And we've seen it from an all-time low back in April of May to more recent times, and you probably saw the GDT auction today up another 4.5%, or post-currency up 7%. So we've noticed that significant change. Thankfully for farmers, it is starting to equate back to farm gate milk price, and we were all very pleased today, none more so than farmers, to see the processors are continuing to increase their prices across the board for October milk, and our own views, and having discussed it with the guys who are forecasting out the markets, is that we are heading, hopefully, to that 30 cent a litre price, whether it be the first quarter or second quarter of next year, ideally the first quarter, provided market returns can sustain it.
Kevin, thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome.
We hope that you're enjoying this Irish Farmers Journal podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy. Find out more at farmersjournal.ie.
The election of Donald Trump as the 45th President of the US is yet another factor in political uncertainty for exporters. At last week's Fianna Fáil Brexit seminar, Irish Country Living editor Mairead Lavery met Simon McKeever, who is the Chief Executive of the Irish Exporters Association. She first asked him about a survey showing the vast majority of exporters are worried about Brexit.
It's the single biggest issue for our members at the moment. There's nothing really like Brexit out there at the moment, except for maybe Trexit, as I like to call it. So, we're probably heading into a perfect storm in the first 3 to 6 months of next year when Donald Trump takes power in America. So it's not just going to be, in my view, about Brexit. It's going to be how we see ourselves dealing with Brexit in an environment in the Western world where politics is really changing.
Your members also believe that the foundations of the EU are under threat because of Brexit situation.
We have the survey that you mentioned earlier on, and we asked various different questions. That was one of the questions that they came back. And I think the reality now is that we're seeing a change in the paradigm in Western politics at the moment. I actually think Ireland was the first country in that we have politics now that is made up of many different independents representing individual things that are important to individual people. In the UK, Brexit for me was really around, it was about sovereignty, it was taking back control. In Ireland, is that on those micro issues, is it taking back control? In America, Trexit is taking back control. Next up is Holland with their general election in March. Not to mention the referendum in Italy, but you have this wave, I think, going across Western democracies where people want to take back control.
Yeah.
So I think Brexit is the first shot across that bow in Europe, and I'm wondering how things are going to pan out in the French election in particular, where Marine Le Pen is leading in the polls alongside Alain Juppé, I think. So there's quite a strong chance that the unexpected may happen. And those politicians who think that the unthinkable cannot happen, you better wake up.
But we've had so many years, 5 decades of stability. History proves over and over again that things change.
But things are taking a dramatic change, and I think there's two paradigms. I think that there's possibly groupthink amongst people at the top of society in both politics and business and that. And it's for me, it's when I've been meeting people who I know that you see a whole other side of society out there, and it's that side of society that is driving this new politics that's out there. So I think, going back to the Brexit issue, it's the single biggest issue facing this country at the moment. There is possibly going to be a delay in the UK's decision to call Article 50 with the Supreme Court vote now in the UK. But I think whatever way we look at this, I think we are looking at a very different relationship between Ireland, Britain, possibly America and Europe.
And they are our two greatest trading partners, and we're wedged literally between them.
We are wedged between them. There are three greatest. If you look at the United Kingdom, EU and America, 75% of our trade goes there. In terms of what's important to indigenous small Irish businesses and the agriculture food sector, Britain's number one.
Yeah.
So really, really important market.
One of the things you said in your presentation was that a border can add 24% of the costs of doing business. We're here right on the border. The implications of that are really, really significant. Can you comment further?
Well, it's staggering. I mean, that was a piece of research that somebody mentioned to me, that they had seen that the imposition of border controls would add 24% to exporting businesses. That's one piece. The second piece is that the UK's view on immigration, in my mind, is totally irreconcilable with having a soft border north and south. And the third thing to mention on that is the only other land border that the United Kingdom per se has in Europe is in Gibraltar. I actually visited Gibraltar during the summer, and we drove to the border. We were staying in Spain. We drove to the border, and we parked up a side street, but there was a 3-hour queue to get your car into Gibraltar.
Yes.
You could actually walk across in about 3 minutes. There's a 3-hour tailback. So, I just cannot see how you can reconcile the immigration stance of the British government with having a soft border. But those two, they don't add up.
And that has implications. The whole thing, it's not going to be over this year, next year. The implications of Brexit is something we're going to live with for a generation or two.
I think absolutely, and I think we need to be certain that there's no silver bullet in all of this. The help that companies need right now immediately is around short-term cash flow issues, and we've heard that with the mushroom growers here, but it's also from what we're seeing across our members, across sectors, issues. How do you deal with the sudden movement in the exchange rate? It's around cash flow lending. It's to be able to get over the hump, I think, of the next 12 months in particular. Long term, it goes back to competitiveness issues. And a UK freed from European tax policy will become very, very competitive towards Ireland. So on the one hand, we need to balance our relationship with the United Kingdom, because if it all goes pear-shaped in Europe, we're really, really going to need them. With the fact that, and I think you said it yourself, we need to be jumping up and down in Europe and making absolutely certain that people hear that we have a special case in all of this. And you mentioned the banking crisis. We didn't get any real help out of Europe then. Can we really expect they're going to listen to us this time?
Exactly. Thank you very much, Simon.
The Irish Farmers Journal Weekly Podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.
Our agribusiness editor, Owen Lowry, was in the US recently, and he hopped in a combine with tillage farmer Steve Pitstick to bring the maize harvest in Illinois.
I'm a corn and bean farmer, corn for grain, soybeans. I farm about 2,400 acres. The other guy that I partner with for harvest is about 3,000 acres.
Okay.
So we just have a corporation that we own a harvester with, and we're team together to try to get everything done most efficient. This is my 42nd harvest.
Yeah.
I started when I was really young. So.
And how has the harvest been this year?
Actually, some of the best we've ever had. Corn and soybeans, phenomenal yields. The last couple of years we've had insect issues, dry weather issues, or excessive rain issues. We haven't really been able to fully get the value of the crops and the high-priced seed that we're buying. We haven't been fully able to realize that until this year. And some perfect weather this year, climate conditions. All the planets lined up this year. We've got record corn and soybean production.
And I see that seems to be the trend that's across America at the moment. It looks like it's going to be a record year.
Yeah, there's some pockets that are less than perfect, but overall, really good.
So farmers in general, good yields. How's the price been relative to other years?
Price is quite a bit lower. But over the last 2 years, some of our costs have adjusted down. So profitability-wise, this year will be certainly better than last year with the yields and adjusted cost. Last year may have been the bottom. We hope anyway.
Yeah.
And now we're on to better times.
In a year like this with the good yields, you're in a better position than you were last year. You're making money at the moment?
Yeah. Yes, definitely making money. But I think most of us are a little bit gun shy of spending that money after having a couple challenging years. I don't see a lot of reinvestment in new machinery. From 2008 to 14, agriculture really boomed here.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of upgrades in machinery. John Deere couldn't build stuff fast enough. And then in late 14, 15, it just stopped. People just quit buying stuff. And I'm not sure that we'll start buying again just because we had a good year.
So we're sitting in a John Deere
S680.
Yeah, and how old is it, and do you buy them?
2014.
Yeah.
We used to, from the late 90s until 2014, we traded every year for a new one. And this is the 3-year-old machine we're still running just because of the economy. It's a little bit softer. Don't want to put out that expense. And the cost of trade went up 2x, 3x over that year. So we just backed away from it, which then trickled down all the way through the system.
Do farmers here think that the cost of machinery will have to come down now, or do they expect it to come back? Or does that affect the second-hand trade value if the new price, the cost of change, stays the same?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting dynamic that's going to be played out. I don't see the price of machinery coming down. We've already got low interest rates, almost zero.
To touch on GMOs, so what's this variety?
Yeah, this is a Monsanto variety. It's stacked with GMOs, or I would say traits.
Yep.
That allow us to grow corn, high-yielding corn, without synthetic pesticides, chemical pesticides. The traits are in the corn.
This is GMO corn specifically to be Roundup ready,
Roundup ready, yes.
But also on the insects.
On the insect side, yes.
Okay. Has GMO corn been a game changer for farmers in general with regards to yield and costs?
That's interesting because in the beginning it was being able to spray Roundup and kill everything, being able to use traits in the seed instead of trying to apply insecticides. It really was a game changer. We got huge value out of it. But now after almost 15 to 20 years of using it, the value isn't there like it used to be. We're getting resistant weeds, which nature just does that. It's not anything other than that, just adaptation to the environment. And so we're having to use other chemicals than Roundup to control our weeds, which has led to more cost because we're still paying for that technology of the Roundup, but it doesn't work. And some of the insects are starting to adapt now after 20 years, and you may have to start going back to insecticides.
So,
and the price hasn't adjusted accordingly.
So given where you're profiting the crop this year, what's your feeling and farmers' feeling in general in this area around the quantities and the acreage they'll plant next year in corn, or will they switch to other crops?
Yeah, I think there could be a little bit of switch to more soy. There seems to be a trend. We've had good yields the last couple of years. It costs less to raise soy. There's a huge corn carryover. But we need a huge corn crop every year because we're using so much of it.
But this year there's going to be a higher stock of corn, and there has been.
And soybeans.
Yeah.
But the potential for both of them actually, price rally and potential, I think, is maybe greater now that we're at such a depressed level. We built demand. So we have huge demand, and if we have any kind of crop problems at all, we could see some good rebounds in prices.
For you, what's the most profitable crop?
Up until maybe last year, corn has been for the last 10 years. But now all of a sudden, soybean yields are really starting to step up. We're intensively managing them more than we have in the past. And we've been able to step up in profitability. But it's always changing because the price of nitrogen drops. It's all about yield because we have X amount of dollars that are in cost. And then what the yield is and how you divide that. Over corn, we can always divide that cost by more bushels.
You're listening to the Irish Farmers Journal podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.
Jemison is looking for candidates for its graduate programme to work on developing the Irish whisky brand around the world. Mary Phelan has all the details in this week's Irish Country Living, and she answered Thomas Hubert's questions about the programme.
they are currently recruiting for their graduate program for 2017, and they are actually celebrating 25 years of the graduate program, which began in 1991. And since then, Jemison has recruited over 350 graduates altogether, and 34% of them still work in Irish Distillers. Now, Irish Distillers owns Jemison, so they're either working in Irish Distillers or they're working in the Wido Pernod Ricard Group, which is the wine and spirits giant that owns Irish Distillers.
And they're where I'm from myself, so I can see their international footprint. They're everywhere around the world, really.
Yes, they own a lot of different spirits and a lot of names that would be very familiar to our audience, like Absolute Vodka, for example. So Jemison, Absolute Vodka, and a whole host of other alcohol brands come under the Pernod Ricard Group.
So those jobs that you can get on those graduate programs, they can expect to work abroad then?
Yes, Jemison is recruiting for up to 30 places on its programme. They can expect to work abroad because Jemison, a lot of its sales are international. So, back in 1988, Jemison was selling less than 500,000 cases, and most of that was sold domestically in Ireland. Then they joined the Pernod Ricard Group, and Pernod Ricard plugged them into kind of an international global distribution network, which allowed them to start kind of selling Jemison in markets it wasn't previously available. And now Jemison sells 5.7 million cases, and only 5% of those sales are in Ireland, while the rest are global, so they're in 130 countries. And at the moment, graduates are in 42 countries around the world, but I mean, they're not in all the countries yet. So I think Jemison are, trying to grow their presence internationally in terms of having people on the ground. And just this year, for the first time, they sent a graduate to the Democratic Republic of Congo, which I know you've been to yourself. Yeah. And they also have a graduate in Kazakhstan. So, the lady that I interviewed was Sinead Darcy. She's headed the graduate program in Jemison. She was mentioning Tokyo. She was mentioning the United States, a huge range of countries. So some graduates, I guess, will be working in Ireland, but a huge amount of them will be going abroad.
And what would Jemison be looking for in those graduates, Mary?
So they say that they're looking for the X factor, really, or what they used to call the vital ingredient, I guess, because it's whiskey. But what they say this kind of means tangibly is that they want someone who's very creative, very innovative. They have to be self-starters. They have to be kind of autonomous workers. And this really is because you're placed in a market abroad, and your job is to kind of suss out this market. And I guess suss out the best way of Jemison kind of getting publicity and becoming more popular in that market. So, she described it as they really are explorers going out and learning about the city they've been placed in. So you might be put in Tokyo, for example. You kind of have to find who are the influencers, who are the bloggers in Tokyo, who would be good people for Jemison to link up with in terms of trying to get the name out there. And, they really kind of, their recruitment process, I guess, lends itself to finding someone like this, because they don't accept CVs. They want people to apply with a video so that they can kind of see your personality from the get-go, see how you express yourself, how you communicate. And Sinead actually mentioned that there's a graduate in Argentina at the moment who has his own weekly radio slot. So really, you can't be shy.
And we're talking about faraway places there, not necessarily English spoken everywhere. Do you need languages for those graduate program jobs?
So they're extremely interested in people with languages. Sinead told me that 80% of Jemison graduates speak a second, third or fourth language. But she said at the same time that 20% don't speak another language because Jemison has so many markets where English is spoken. For example, the United States is the biggest market for Jemison globally. So, there is definitely an opportunity. 1 in 5 don't speak a second language. But, when you hear that India is the biggest whiskey market in the world, it's something I didn't know, but it's not, America is the biggest market for Jemison, but I mean, places like India, I guess Jemison could probably have a bigger footprint there. So really, she mentioned a number of languages to me, like German, French, Portuguese, Italian, Russian, Korean, Japanese and Mandarin. But really, I think if you came with a language they didn't have already, maybe in a market that they're not supplying into yet, you probably could be very useful to them. But one thing she said that I thought was very, very interesting, and maybe can give a bit of hope to those who don't think they're going to come out of college with a 1-1 or a 2-1. She says, we don't mind if you get a pass or a 2-2 degree. One of our best graduates has a 2-2 degree. And she says, I think sometimes companies get a bit too hung up on the level and the type of degree. We're just looking for people who, as I said, are self-starters, are creative, and, you know, really can kind of push themselves and can work in a market where maybe Jameson or Pernod Ricard don't have an office. So your office could be a cafe with Wi-Fi. So you have to be willing to kind of either work there, work from home, but be very motivated.
Okay, thank you very much, Mary. You have all the details and, more importantly, how to apply in this week's Irish Country Living.
Yes, thanks, Thomas.
The Irish Farmers Journal podcast, online at farmersjournal.ie, on the Irish Farmers Journal app and on iTunes every Thursday. Brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.